the other thing about the lack of perfect abstinence, I think it's important to understand a couple things. Like you mentioned the brain chemistry, right? I mean, substances do change your brain. They impact judgment, they impact emotional regulation, and a lot of things. On the other hand, recovery changes your brain too. Like when we start making new positive choices, those alter our brain the same way. And I think we underappreciate that. That same process can be helpful, but it takes time. And so in the beginning, your brain's still saying, you need drug, you need meth, you need meth, you need meth. And you don't sort of have the practice of the good habits or of dealing with the cravings or of handling emotions, because one of the things I was terrified of when I was going to rehab was that I knew that the violence and the pain was underneath my drug use. And the fear is if the drugs are taken away, how am I going to handle that pain, right? How am I going to handle all the trauma that had happened to me that I knew was in there and unresolved? And so part of that relapse, or I wouldn't even call it relapse, part of the lack of perfection can be because you're having emotions that are surging now that if you've been sort of shoving them down and you don't have the skill set to handle them all the time, as well as you would like. It takes time, it takes practice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I am your host, Ryan Anthony, and today our special guest is Mary Beth O'Connor. Mary Beth, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
I'm great that we were able to connect, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you.
Well, first, I just wanted to share with the audience how I encountered your work, and that was over on X. You have a lot of messages going out daily on recovery, on sobriety, and this caught my attention because it's very informative, and I see also that you have a memoir titled From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. Can you share a bit about that journey? Well, first of all, can you tell us what the book, your memoir, covers in your life?
Sure. And I will just quickly mention about X that I am at Mary Beth _. I really tried hard, as you mentioned, to provide information, right? Like I'll provide the new studies that come out about substance use and recovery or trauma recovery or mental health recovery and my own recovery thoughts. So like, I'm not there to spend hours arguing with people, but I do try to share information that might be useful. So if that's of interest, people, please follow me. And yeah, so the book, the title, I really thought hard to try to capture the arc of the book. And for me, the story is really, unfortunately, a common pathway to drug addiction, which today we call substance use disorder. I'll mix up those terms, during our talk, I'm sure. But for me, it was really child abuse led to childhood addiction. And that's a common pathway because most people who develop problems with substances, they either have some kind of trauma in their childhood and or they have untreated mental health. It's not everyone that develops a substance use disorder, but it's a high percentage. And so I grew up in a, physically abusive household, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, sexually abusive, just a high stress environment. And so when I found my first drug, which was alcohol, and it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill Wine, which sometimes people know, and it was when I was 12. And what I noticed was how much better it made me feel. Like I felt sort of like I could take a deeper breath, like the pain was more distant, it was sort of shoved down a little bit better. But also I was having a happy, fun time with my girlfriend, right? And so part of the thing about the drugs is that in the beginning, they seem to work. That's why you keep doing it, right? But I quickly progressed on to other drugs. And by 16, I found my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I was shooting meth by 17 in high school. And I didn't get sober till 32. So it was a really long haul for me as far as drugs go.
Something that I found interesting in all that you've said is the pathway. It wasn't just that you woke up one day and had an addiction. There were steps that, or maybe not steps, but experiences that you lived through, which over time, it just led towards that direction. And I I bring that up because on the summary of your book, there's a part here where it says, um, uh, it shares her journey from rock bottom to resilience. And I'm bringing that up because as an outsider, someone who, like, for example, I might see somebody on the street, homeless, or somebody who may be a junkie. I know that term is a little bit hard for some, but it's easy to judge. What I admire about memoirs is that the author, the writer, really gives their perspective, their life on how they didn't just wake up one day and these things happened. So it really must have taken you a lot of courage to write this book. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for taking the time and the energy to go back and write these experiences. So thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll say a couple things to that. The junkie term, I would not use that for somebody else. As you say, has negative connotations, but I chose to use it because I felt like from junkie to judge, in just a few words, sort of showed the arc. And in other words, no matter sort of how deep you are in the misery of your addiction, which the term junkie sort of, raises in your mind, but that there's a positive future if you can find your way out. And so I really used it because I wanted to show the arc in a couple words. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I will say when I was thinking about writing the book, and it was when I was appointed a federal judge, it was sort of like, well, how the heck did I go from, shooting meth for many years to judge? It was sort of a reflection time. But I started reading memoir, and a lot of them have a lot of good things, but not all of them show where the addiction came from. And the other thing is, a lot of times at the end, there's not a lot of detail about the recovery. And so I structured my book so that about the first third is my pre-drug use childhood, to sort of show why using drugs to excess sort of made sense to me and was sort of for me, it felt like a natural step. But also 30% of my book is recovery. It's my first 3 years in more detail than some other memoirs go into. And not just the drug recovery, but the trauma recovery, which it turned out I had PTSD and I didn't know it. And that for me showed up as very severe anxiety. And that's also very common. About 50 to 70% of the people that go into substance recovery also have another mental health condition in addition to their substance use disorder, which is in and of itself a mental health condition. It's called dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorder. And so you need to tackle both if you're sort of going to really stabilize and build that happy and productive life. And so that was part of what I wanted to sort of maybe educate people a little bit about, but also to show a real world example of successfully tackling that. In fact, I'm going to have 31 years of sobriety 2 days from now when we're talking. And so the good news too is that the hard work's in the beginning, right? If we do the focused attention work for the first 2 or 3 years, that's usually what it takes to sort of solidify the foundation we need to really move forward in life and sort of put that in the rearview mirror.
So happy early anniversary for 31
Yeah.
years. I think that's something that you can always it's something to celebrate. So yes, congratulations on that. And I really admire how you write, how you speak. Like I said earlier, very informative, and you really give a lot of details, a lot of information. And I wanted to go back, and you said that your first encounter, I think, was it alcohol at 12 years old?
Yes.
Now, how were you introduced to alcohol in the first place at 12 years old?
Yeah, well, I will. So my girlfriend stole it from her sister, and she rode it over to my house on her bicycle, like in the basket, And then we drank it out of Flintstones glasses that used to have grape jelly in them. Like this was sort of the level of our sophistication, right? As soon as after that experience, I was always looking for opportunities to drink, making opportunities. I always looked older than my age, so I hung out with older people, especially guys. But I also would even like steal alcohol from my very dangerous stepfather because that's how much I wanted it. And then I moved on to added in weed, added in pills, did a lot of acid for a while, and then I found meth. And I know sometimes people want to believe that somehow drugs are hard to get, but drugs were not hard to get in my day. Drugs are not hard to get today. You may not always be able to get one specific drug, but you can always get drugs,
Yeah.
always available. And so that was sort of how it progressed. Sometimes alcohol is actually harder to get than other drugs because of, the age restrictions. And so I very early on was sort of just trying to find as many opportunities as I could to consume drugs. And then I escalated into adding more and more drugs. But when I found methamphetamine, that really very quickly became by far my drug of choice. I mean, I say, my terminology is that I was very committed to meth. Like I was really, for whatever reason, biochemically, it fit me best. And it was the drug that, like, I've done heroin, fine, take it or leave it, but meth for me was the one that seemed to meet my needs in the best way, seemed to sort of be the biochemical best fit for me.
So you've also mentioned earlier about having an underlying trauma. This really impacts a person. But now, when you have trauma and you include also drugs, meth, did the meth was it? I don't want to sound bad here, but was it helpful at the time? Did it help in any way to maybe remedy in that time period that you were taking the meth?
In the beginning, yes, because I mean, first of all, meth releases like the most dopamine of all the drugs. And so you really feel happy. Like in the beginning, you really feel like this powerful energy surge. And also it helps numb you out more. Like when you stay up for a couple of days, you're really sort of distant from yourself. There's an emotional distance. And so it seems to keep the pain at bay. So in the beginning, all the drugs seem to work. But for those of us that develop a problem with it, then you're just, you're on that treadmill and it actually, you don't feel that level, you don't get that high, the high that you get in the beginning or very rarely. And then you not only do you feel a lot of lows because with meth you stay up for days and then you crash, but also there's consequences start happening, right? I mean, even as early as high school, for example, chose not to go on my high school senior trip to Florida because I knew we shared rooms with people and I wouldn't be able to hide that I was shooting meth. Like that was already like a consent. Oh, can't go on the Florida trip. They might see that I'm shooting or see my track marks. So already, and I started having some issues at school when I had always been an excellent, top tier student. I had to make up a lot of work because I was missing days. And so you start to lose control of it and the consequences start. And that is the current definition of addiction. It's continued use despite negative consequences. That's sort of the core definition.
And something that I'm finding interesting, or something that I can say shocked me from what you're saying, is that you missed days at school. And I'm just surprised because you're a judge. So I'm wondering, what was your view on education as a child and during your high school years?
Yeah, so school had been always my one positive place in my, abusive and difficult childhood. I always did very well at school. I got a lot of positive attention at school. I grew up in a family, none of my family had ever been to college, but I was sort of, all the teachers assumed, that I was going to college. And I always excelled on standardized tests. But remember when you're a senior, by the time, so I started shooting meth in like August, right before my senior year of high school. But I mean, but I got accepted to college by like January or February or something. So college doesn't really see your grades after that. They see them, but you're already accepted, you're already going. And so I was missing days because, when you're up for a couple days, it's hard to get to school. And when you're high, you don't really want to go,
Yeah.
So there was that. But I had been such a good student, such an excellent student all along that I told the teachers I was having problems at home, which was partially true, and they let me make up the work. So my grades didn't suffer a lot. And plus, I had already been accepted to college, so there weren't any sort of ramifications on me.
Now, when you finished high school and you still had this addiction, how did it impact your college life?
Yeah, so I grew up in Central Jersey and I left to go to California. I graduated from Berkeley. And for the first 3.5 years of college, I did better with drugs. And I will emphasize that better and good are two different words. Okay? I did a lot more drugs than most of the people around me. I still use them very chaotically and I would do crazy things. But for me, it was a little bit better. I wasn't using as much during the week. I was using more alcohol and sometimes like other stimulants or hallucinogens or pills, but it was a little bit better. But I had a really bad kidnapping and like 6 hour rape by three men in college. And then I moved in with a violent boyfriend. And it was sort of like the little grip that I had, I lost. And in January of my senior year of college, I started using meth again on a regular basis. And I didn't get sober for 10 more years until I was 32. So the first couple of years of college were like a brief, somewhat improvement. But then starting, at the end of college for 10 more years, it was just increasing misery, increasing consequences. It was a miserable time.
So being in an addiction, I know it's something that it's hard. It feels like you can't separate yourself from whatever it is that you're addicted to. And it's also the brain, the chemicals. I don't understand all of it, but I just know it's not easy to detach oneself, especially after a decade. Um, so what was your step to, first of all, waking up, and uh, what was your first step towards the other direction, towards the opposite path?
Yeah, and I will say it wasn't like in the movies where a light bulb goes off. And that does happen for some people. Some people, they'll get let's say a DUI, and that'll be a real wake-up call, and they'll actually start addressing their problem then. But for me and for a lot of people, it's really sort of a cumulative impact of negative consequences. And so by 32, for example, I couldn't hold a job. My terminology is that I hadn't worked my way up the corporate ladder after college. I had worked my way down the corporate ladder after college because I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't get there. I couldn't focus. I also was having some physical problems. I was just feeling trapped and hopeless and debilitated. And my partner of many years was ready to throw me out. Like he was really done. And so it was sort of everything together that made me finally say, maybe I ought to go to rehab. Maybe I should try rehab. And so that's what it was. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And it's also not a certainty, right? It's not like most people don't start recovery thinking, I'm definitely going to be able to stay sober. Like that's not usually how it starts. I didn't really believe I could stay sober. I was really not that I wanted to keep using. I just didn't think that was possible. And so my goal was to sort of, let's see if I can figure out how to use less, how to do better. And that's sort of how I started it. And I say that in part that I don't want people to have this sort of artificial barrier to getting help or starting the process based on if, I have to have certainty or I have to, be fully committed because you don't. In fact, I used meth 3 times in my first 5 months, which also is common, perfect abstinence from day one. It happens, but it's not the majority, right? 3 times in 5 months. That was really a lot better, right? I mean, that
Yes.
was a vast improvement, but it wasn't perfection. And so I throw those ideas out there, including for friends and family to understand what the process is more likely to look at than what they see on TV or in the movies.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I think sometimes when, of course, you have trauma and you have addiction and you want to get out of that, whatever that bubble is that you're in, you want an immediate perfection and to be on the other side already. But I really like how you're breaking it down that, 3 times it's not perfection, but it sure as hell is a change.
Yes.
And it's so easy to beat oneself up and to get discouraged and to just give up entirely, but you didn't. And I'm really just want to explore more on what was your mindset at this time when you did have meth 3 times. What kept you from going back towards that direction?
Yeah, and I'll say so the other thing about the lack of perfect abstinence, I think it's important to understand a couple things. Like you mentioned the brain chemistry, right? I mean, substances do change your brain. They impact judgment, they impact emotional regulation and a lot of things. On the other hand, recovery changes your brain too. Like when we start making new positive choices, those alter our brain the same way. And I think we underappreciate that. That same process can be helpful, but it takes time. And so in the beginning, your brain's still saying, you need drug, you need meth, you need meth, you need meth. And you don't sort of have the practice of the good habits or of dealing with the cravings or of handling emotions, because one of the things I was terrified of when I was going to rehab was that I knew that the violence and the pain was underneath my drug use. And the fear is if the drugs are taken away, how am I going to handle that pain, right? How am I
Mm.
going to handle all the trauma that had happened to me that I knew was in there and unresolved? And so part of that relapse, or I wouldn't even call it relapse, part of the lack of perfection can be because you're having emotions that are surging now that if you've been sort of shoving them down and you don't have the skill set to handle them all the time, as well as you would like. It takes time, it takes practice. And that's why the longer someone's sober, the lower the odds that they're going to have another relapse or slip. Like once you hit 5 years of continuous sobriety, your odds of ever having a recurrence, which is the medical word for relapse, it's only 15%. And 15% is not much higher than the risk of you, for example, developing a substance use disorder. In other words, you're almost back to baseline as far as your risk goes. But that's part of what happens. You have to have time to sort of reformulate new positive habits and build up in a positive direction. And then often, like me, I needed mental health treatment for my PTSD and my anxiety, and all of that's going on. It's a lot. You're dealing with a lot in early recovery. You really are. And it's important to have the goal, and it's important to sort of do the work, but it's really hard to have perfection when all that's going on at the same time.
And during your early recovery, what did you rely on? Did you rely on faith? Did you rely on yourself? Did you rely on books?
Yeah, so I went into rehab in 93. My sober date's 94, January 13th, 94. And so I didn't know it, but I went into I saw rehab as like I'm going in for medical treatment, right? I mean, I did understand I had a medical condition. It's a brain disorder. I mean, today it's categorized as a mental health disorder in the diagnostic manual, that
Mm.
therapists and psychiatrists use. But when I got there, it turned out my rehab was adamantly and vehemently only 12 steps. And 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all the Anonymouses. And a lot of people do well with 12 steps, and I support them when they do, but it's also not the best fit for many others. And it was not the right fit for me. But they swore to me there's nothing else. And so, at first I believed them because I'm paying them. They're the experts, right? And so what I did in the beginning, because I couldn't do what they were asking, it was impossible, but I did try to do everything that I could. So I did all the homework in rehab. I wrote what they wanted me to write. I read what they wanted me to read. I went to groups they wanted me to go to. And I gained, some knowledge, some of the sort of the science of addiction they taught us, started to do a little bit of therapy. They taught us things like, how to handle triggers, and then I did read all of the Alcoholics Anonymous big book and all of the Narcotics Anonymous text. And I pulled out the ideas I thought would be useful. But then when I got home from rehab, I was in a longer term program. I got home in January. And I'll emphasize for the younger people like you that in 1994, there's no Google. Okay. There's no Google. So I thought, is it true? There's no other options. And I got in my car and I went to the library and I did the research. And it turned out there were other choices even then. And today there's even more. And so I found Women for Sobriety, which still exists. I found the parent organization to Life Ring Secular Recovery, the parent organization to Smart Recovery. And I read all those books and I went to all those meetings and I started trauma therapy. And so it was really sort of trying to, and I was listening to people like, even they were like the smoke break at a meeting, are they talking about a strategy that they're using or an idea that might be helpful? So I was sort of trying to expose myself to as many ideas and techniques and strategies as possible. But I always viewed myself as the decision maker. Like, which of these ideas do I think will help me? And then also will help me now. Because, I had a lot of areas to work on and I couldn't fix them all at once. I had to prioritize. And so it was sort of that, like trying to gather ideas, strategies, techniques, prioritizing what I thought was most important for me to work on now, and then trying to apply what I was told. And, setting a goal, building a plan. You reach goal number one. Well, what's goal number two? What's plan number two? Sort of like approaching it like that. That's really how I did it. That's how I thought about it.
I really like the way you describe that part of your journey because I think it's so easy because they told you this is the only way, the anonymous, this is the way that works. And for some it could be. But you're also honest with yourself during this time. And I liked how you had this discussion with yourself and you're also listening to others, but also you knew that this wasn't like, is this it for me? And you had the curiosity and I guess the bravery to go out and look for answers that were helpful for you. And I think that's something beautiful that people can take away from this. That maybe it's good to hear people's advice, but also hear yourself and what works for you. And if you don't have the answers, it's okay to search, and that's what you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think there's like say today, if I'm talking to a newcomer, I think there's value in me saying, here's how I did it, here's how I approached it, here's why I think my techniques worked for me. But I don't say it as in you, therefore you must do what I did. That would be arrogant to me, right? That person's different than me. I need to say it as here's some ideas for your consideration. I'm sharing information for your consideration. And if my success can be a reassurance and a guidepost, that's fabulous. But I want to help you find what's going to work for you. I don't need you to copy what worked for me. Those are two very different approaches, I think.
And then earlier you were mentioning how during this 10-year period, how also with relationships, it wasn't going so well. Now that you've gone through your therapy, your recovery, you found yourself a bit more, I should say. How did it impact your relationships with others?
I mean, I will say, my trauma therapy, and I did really search for someone with expertise in trauma. I think we need to make sure our therapist has the skill set that matches our needs. And she had a little bit of addiction expertise. My trauma therapy, and as I said, PTSD, very, very severe anxiety, that took longer to recover from than my substance recovery. And I think that's very common because that was older and it was more complicated. And so, and part of that was related to an impact on my interpersonal relationship. So, for example, I really had terrible interpersonal skills. Like I couldn't listen. I would get aggressive if I felt at all judged or questioned or like emotionally threatened. I had a real problem with, I would get on the verbal attack. I mean, I really had poor skills, and that was related to my PTSD. That was related to my trauma, and also the example that was set in my house. And so
Mm.
I had to, first of all, understand why I was reacting that way, and then to understand what a better behavior would be. So first, it's like, okay, I see now that I'm behaving this way that I don't like, right? That I'm behaving a way I don't like. So first I have to see it, and then I have to think about, well, how should I behave in that situation? And then I have to try to implement it. But it's not snap your fingers. For me, it's always, well, at first I can change the behavior in sort of the emotionally neutral situations or slight emotional stress. But at first I can't do it if the emotions get heightened or my fear gets heightened. But over time, I can gradually handle more and more challenging situations. And so that was sort of
Mm.
how all of it evolved for me, and including on the interpersonal side. And then also my husband and I, we had to do couples counseling because he was really like he was really at the end of his rope. But I was lucky in that he let me come home and he waited to see if I was actually going to get better. And then he worked with me. And so we had to do that as well. And a lot of that was communication. A lot of that was we had frustration with each other. We had anger with you, and we had to learn how to better communicate.
Wow, that's very. I'm happy for your husband for just having that approach with you and that understanding. I think one of the sad things is many times people who are in trauma, they get abandoned sometimes, or maybe not abandoned, but people move on, and maybe it's sometimes understandable when someone is difficult to deal with that people leave, but it's also good to hear stories like your husband who was there with you and who had compassion and patience.
Yeah, and he did start to see that I was, that I was really trying for the first time, right? But you're right. I mean, certainly I'd lost friendships along the way. People just got, frustrated. And also, when you're in the middle of an addiction, I mean, I had some loving relationships with other people who were using, but it is harder for me to be a good friend, let's say, because I am not a reliable person to show up when you need me. I'm not even a reliable person to come to your birthday party, like, because I'm on drugs. Okay. So maybe I'll show up and maybe I won't. And if I'm there, maybe I'll behave appropriately and maybe I won't, And so you can be a challenging friend under those circumstances. And you do lose people along the way because, they're not gonna stand by you forever if you're not working on it, if you're not trying. People understandably get aggravated, but they also, I think they get sad and they know they've tried to offer you good advice and you didn't listen and you didn't listen, and you didn't
Mhm.
listen. And eventually they have to take care of themselves and move on. So you're right. It's definitely a relationship rupturer.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I'm on social media a lot, especially when I started my own recovery. And everyone has a life, and not everyone's life is perfect. But I would see people at times posting, "Oh, my friends have left me. There's nobody here." And I love these people, but at the same time, I was trying to analyze, well, these friends have been loyal and they've been supportive for like 20 years, and many times you've pushed them away. So I mean, I don't tell them that, but also I try to understand both sides. So yeah, this just brings a lot of light in this conversation. And now I just wanted to pivot for a moment and go back to something that you said earlier about you climbed down the corporate ladder. Now you're recovering, you found your recovery, you're building that interpersonal relationship with yourself. How did you climb back up?
Yeah, so I'll go back to one thing that you said about you want things to go fast. So I will say this, in early recovery, everybody I know, we want to recover really fast. Like people want to be like, in a year, I should be like as if I never used drugs, right? Well, that's not always realistic. And so part of it is trying to learn patience. I say the keys to recovery, the biggest are patience and persistence, but it's hard to do that. And I wasn't happy about doing it professionally either or in other ways. So I had worked my way, I had a Berkeley degree, actually had good grades. But by my last job before rehab, I was doing word processing and I lost that job in 9 months because I couldn't get there and I couldn't concentrate. And so when I got sober, I'm 32, so I feel old. I've wasted my education I had, and my resume is an embarrassment. Like I'm embarrassed to try to apply, but also nobody was going to hire me for a career job with that resume, even with my degree. They weren't, and I wasn't ready. And so I did have to be realistic about how to start, working myself back into professional growth. And I'll say my first job goal was let's not get fired again. Like that was my first goal. Okay, let's not get fired again. Let's see if we can do that. And so I started with a part-time, temporary, low-level administrative job. And I did that for like 6 months. Because for me to get up and go to work on time every day and stay all the hours, like not leave at lunch and not go back or, whatever, and do a good job day after day. I hadn't had that kind of discipline since college, to over 10 years ago. I needed to get sort of in the habit of it, to have that be my pattern. And then my second job was a full-time permanent mid-level administrative job. And then I got a job at a larger company and in a supervisory role and got a promotion. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law School. 6.5 years sober. And then I worked at a big law firm when I graduated. Then I worked for the federal government doing class action litigation. And then at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. And now I'm retired, and we can talk about what I'm doing in retirement. But that was the progression of it. It wasn't like I could leap into the job I should have had when I graduated from college, or I needed to be realistic about what job I could get and also what job I could handle.
And during this process of you becoming a judge, you being a judge, did you ever get a lot of any pushback for your past?
So I was lucky in a way. So when I applied to the California bar, after law school, right? So by now I had almost 10 years sober by then. And so the California bar does not say, have you ever used drugs? It says, in the last 5 years, have you used drugs or do you currently have a problem with drugs? It was something along that. Well, I had 10 years. So I could answer honestly and say no, right? And then when I became a federal attorney for the federal government, I think they asked about 7 and I had like 14 or something. And when I became a judge, they asked about 10 and I had 20. So I was sort of always ahead in my recovery process. But when I was a judge, I joined the board for Life Free Secular Recovery. And that I had to tell them about because it's like an outside activity, and I had to run it through ethics. So that was the first time that I told them. And I wasn't specific. I didn't say meth. I didn't say shut up. I just said, I have, I don't know, 23 years of sobriety. I'm going to be on this board and here's what I'm going to do. But I was a little nervous just, to reveal it. But at the same time, it's really the thing with work is that it's that you don't know how they're going to react. I mean, when I was a judge, I had 20 year sober. Come on. I mean, 20 really, it was really irrelevant at that point, but you just don't know what people's impression is going to be. And so there's always that little bit of concern. But that's how it played out for me as far as work goes. I didn't have to tell them. And so I didn't tell them.
Well, hearing your story from uh, the beginning to where we are now, uh, could you ever see your memoir turning into a movie or maybe a series one day?
That would be nice. I mean, I actually do have a producer for Lifetime Movies looking at it. But right now in retirement, what I do is when I retired as a judge, all of a sudden I could actually tell my story completely, right? I didn't have to
Mhm.
filter anything anymore. So it was sort of a new opportunity for me to be of service to my community while also keeping myself active, part-time active in retirement. So I have the book and I've also I've written opinion pieces, like I've had pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times and Recovery Today. And those are all on my website, junkietoJudge.com. And then I do a lot of speaking and I do training. I even train lawyers and judges because they have like continuing legal education requirements, and I do a substance use training that I do for them. So it's I'm able to share my story and share information. I really spend a lot of time keeping up on the new science, the new studies that come out, so that I know where we are. What I was taught 30 years ago wasn't always correct. We know a lot more now than we did then, and I stay up on all that stuff so I can talk from a informed position. And so that's sort of how I do it all now is I try to have that mix of speaking and engaging and talking to people. People send me messages through my website and I'll respond. They're looking for guidance or information. So it's just retirement's offered me an opportunity to be of use in a new way and to do things that I enjoy doing while also hopefully adding value, sharing important information.
It sounds like you've been very helpful to the community as a judge, and even at this moment when you're partly active. You're still being helpful to the community, writing and just being out there. And also, like I mentioned earlier, I discovered you through Twitter because it was just so informative. I couldn't ignore it because I'm not sure if you post every day, but and they're not just opinions or feelings. There's a lot of substance in what you put out there. Uh, what is your purpose? What is your goal in you putting out so much valuable information?
I mean, for people who have a substance use disorder, part of it is to give them some reassurance about, that recovery is possible. I do share some of my recovery thoughts, to hopefully be of use. As again, just as ideas, here's how I did it, or here's some technique. I use this technique and it helped me, or talking about that mental health, trauma, substance relationship. But then I also share a lot of the new studies and the articles, and that's partly also to inform friends and family, right? Like, to give them a deeper understanding. When I do trainings, I literally start with what is a substance use disorder? What's the definition? Because most people don't actually know what the definition is. And so, or I'll go through, what are the treatment options, because all people ever see is they know 28-day program from a movie somewhere, right? But they don't actually know, actually, there's outpatient programs and there's therapists with addiction expertise and there's peer support specialists. And I'll share the different peer support groups, 12 steps and Life Ring and, She Recovers and others. And so it's to put information out there that hopefully at least some of the people will find valuable, but it's for my community, but also for the friends and family of my community.
Now, for this part of the interview, I wanted to shift to your memoir. Uh, where can people find your memoir and get a copy?
So again, it is called From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And it's on Amazon and all the usual sites. And your bookstore either has it or can get it for you if you prefer to do it that way. So it's readily available.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we wrap this up, I have a question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what is your truth that heals?
I think the truth that heals, I guess part of it is trying to sort of connect to your true self. I mean, one of the things that I thought about my early recovery was, who was I before the drugs and before the trauma? To sort of try to reconnect to my original authentic self. And I think that can be a part of people's growth if they have a lot of different traumas or life experiences, to sort of really try to reconnect to the person you were sort of intended to be, your authentic self. And I think that's a strength, because for me, I viewed it like she's in there, right? And if I can connect to her, that's going to sort of move the ball forward without me having to recreate the wheel. Like, I already have some natural interests, some natural strengths, some natural personality traits. They had gotten covered up. But to get to sort of, the healthy, true, authentic life, reconnecting to those parts of yourself, I think can be really valuable, a really strong foundation for moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth. It's been an honor to have you on the podcast. And before we go, do you have a link or a website where people can find more information about you?
Yeah, so the website is junkie2judgeto.com. And my opinion pieces are there, some other interviews, but also people can message me through my website. And so if they have speaking opportunities or they have questions, I answer every message. It's an easy way to reach me. And if after this podcast you forget my name, I don't think you're going to forget the Junkie Judge. And I'm very Googleable at this point, so you can always find me.
So thank you. And to the audience, I'll be leaving links in the show notes below. So if you didn't catch all that, I'll be leaving it there so you can go ahead and click, and it'll send you to the websites where you can find all the information to buy the book, and also to check out all the information about Mary Beth O'Connor. So Mary Beth, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast, The Truth That Heals. And to the audience, thank you so much for tuning in.